In our last video, we really looked at one way really to enable us to prepare data sets to be able to run more useful statistical analysis on them. For example, if we convert something from an integer to a float, we might be able to get more precise calculations for its standard deviation, the minimum, maximum, averages, median, etc. Right? So in our last video, we're going to continue um, exploring this idea where we really want to just enable or find ways to enable us to do more statistical analysis. We've already looked at if we have a value in a column which is null or none or not applicable, right? We would just remove that row altogether. Now we're going to see a way where instead of removing the complete row, we're just going to fill the value where it's none to 0. And there's a lot of benefits to this, right? First of all, you have more data now to play with, right? If I scroll up and I look at our example where we filtered out all the NA or the none rows, we started off with six rows, and we only ended up with 2. And that's less data for us to analyze now. So it's really useful to find some tricks for us to keep as much of the data as possible, right? Obviously, you don't want the data to be low quality, but wherever possible, you should try to keep as much data as you can. So in this last exercise, we're going to see how to convert all the, row values that are none to 0. And this really follows the syntax of the last function, right? Where we focus in on a specific column and then do some sort of or run some sort of calculation on each value of that column, specifically each row in the column, right? So I'm going to scroll up and take this data already that has many nuns, right? So I'll paste it here and I'll just rename this to something else, electronics data. We have some ID, let's just change the names now. We have a wristwatch, a wireless earbud, golf clubs, a printer. And then instead of an email, I'm going to write quantities for these. So the first is none. Second is also none. For the third, we have 779. And for the fourth, we have 849. And these rows don't exist. For the last value in the column, it's the price, which is 135 for the first row, 821 for the second row, 9,319 for the third row, and then 3,051 for the fourth row. So, I really just created a new data set. I just used the old none example as a skeleton so I can easily populate the values. So now we ran this electronics data. Let's create a column for it. So the column names are name, quantity, price. Sorry. And I want to sort of show you an error that can occur, which is very common when you're creating data frames. Notice how I have data for 4 columns here. I have the ID, I have the name, the quantities, right? And the prices. But in my columns, I only remember to write 3 names. So when I go ahead and create this data frame, what do you think will happen? So I can create my data frame as always. Remember the D and the F are capital. For data, I use electronics data. And then for our columns, we use the electronics data column. So this is going to give me an error. And the reason is that the number of columns that I initialized don't match up with the amount of data I'm providing. Mainly, I need to have 4 column names, right? Because it doesn't understand uh, which column name belongs to which uh, piece of data. So it won't be able to associate properly. And notice how after I ran this function, I get exactly that error. 3 columns passed, but past data had 4 columns, right? So to easily fix this, I'm going to add another column here called ID and just run this cell again, and then run this again. And now we have no issues, right? So if I check our data frame, we have the intended rows and columns that we wanted. And we have these values NaN here, right? So this is basically none, right? And we want to replace these with zeros, right? So we're going to use a similar syntax as last time. Remember, these NaNs, right? Or these none values or null values come from the quantity column. So I'm going to first call my table, right? And in that table, I just want to focus in on the quantity column, right? And for each value in the quantity column, I'm just pasting the same piece again, because this is the syntax to check each value in the quantity column. I want to fill all the NAs, right, or the nones or the nulls with 0, right? So in brackets here, I just put 0. If I run this, something happened in the background. If I check our table again, notice how these are now zeros, right? Instead of the whole row, these whole 2 rows being removed. You can do something smarter where instead of filling it with 0, you're filling it with the average quantities of all the available data, right? So we can easily first calculate the average quantities of every uh, data that's available for that column, and then fill it with that instead. And now we really have, the data for the quantity for these 2 rows might not be as accurate, but we still preserved the price values for them, right? And that's really key because now we have more data to look at. And, when we run statistics or statistical analysis on these, it should be more accurate.